Actually, I do like from time to time to go back to an earlier period. One of the things, of course, is that this has been happening from fairly early on because Devi was made in 1960 or 61. It has been my intention not to repeat myself. I like trying out various styles, various genres, various periods, and then occasionally coming back to contemporary times. So it started with Devi. Then in 1963 or 64, I did Charulata. No, earlier on, I did Jalsaghar. But that was, let us say, the not turn of the century, but 1930s. Now, there is a challenge in recreating an earlier period, and I love to face up to this challenge. I love doing research into an earlier period. I love designing costumes of an earlier period. I like designing, I just want to recapture an earlier period through the cinema. You can do it very effectively. And as I said before, I love to face up to this challenge. I'm fascinated by it. It's just that my interest is fairly widespread. I'm not only interested in my own times. That there is, and if you really work it out, I think more films of mine have dealt with contemporary times than with earlier times. But it's a wonderful challenge, and it's a wonderful exercise to do research into Shatranj ke Khiladi, for instance. It's a chess player, which was incredibly fascinating. It increased my knowledge, and in being able to recreate a period of mid-19th or a little later than that, it gives you a great satisfaction. The system used in scripting is the same in every case. The story which grips my imagination, which I feel would make a film. And once I've decided to make a film off the story, first of all, I do what everyone else does, is do a block treatment. That's where a certain amount of literary effort is expended. After that, it becomes, then I would take individual scenes and start working on the dialogue, how the scene works out in terms of dialogue. That I write down, and then particularly some tricky scenes, which I take up first and find out whether it works all right in terms of dialogue. And then it's a question of breaking down. And when I break down the script into a shooting script, then I do a lot of sketching. All the frames are drawn out, and the thing looks, on the left hand, down the left-hand side are sketches, frames, 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 and on the right-hand side are the notes on camera movements and the dialogue. This is not a unique system. It is used by other directors as well. I once went to the Cinematheque and found a script which I thought was mine. It turned out to be Kurosawa's. But he uses the identical method, and I'm sure there are other directors who use the same method, because the script is not a literary exercise at all, because words are wasted. So I keep words down to a minimum, just the camera directions, and then dialogue, and then sketches. I can't say that Western music has directly influenced my approach to filmmaking. After all, music, any music, Western or Indian, is an abstract form, whereas film tells a story. So there's a basic difference between the two anyway. But there are certain forms of Western music which evolved in the late 18th century, which is the sonata form, which has a dramatic structure. You have this first subject, which is followed by a second subject. First subject, if it's masculine, the second subject may be feminine, you see. So there's already a contrast between the two. And then there's a development section which follows, where these two themes are combined and they play against each other, so that there's this conflict situation develops between the two themes. And then there's a recapitulation section, and then there's a concluding section. So this is a dramatic form which Beethoven used, which Mozart used, where you already have something like the element of a story. What happens to these two subjects? How they go from key to key, and how they turn tragic by a change in key, and how they again then come back to the original form. So that is a vaguely dramatic structure which may have some relationship to the dramatic structure of a story, but not very much. It's superficial, it's not very close. But the question of rhythm, of tempo, of changes in mood, all these relate to film also, because the film, like music also, like Western composed music, exists as an inflexible pattern in time. Whereas in Indian music, as you know, it changes. With one musician can sing a rag for 1 hour, another can. You have a 3-minute record of a raga. So there you have more flexibility, whereas Western music, being composed music, is rigid. I think I was helped particularly in acquiring a sense of tempo and rhythm through my understanding and familiarity with Western music. And even when composing a film, let us say, these are at the back of your mind. I mean, that has to be there. But in actually composing the music for the film, the real work is done at the very last stage, after the film is completely ready and I have all the footage that I need for the music. But stray ideas, little germs of themes, may occur even when I'm working on the script. And then I would jot it down in my book for possible use at a later stage, or it may be abandoned and a new theme might emerge. But really the final work of composing the music comes at the very end, when the film is absolutely ready and when you have all the footage and when you know the structure of the film, how it moves, the rhythm of the film, the pace of the film, when you know that you have that right in front of you, then you really compose the music. American films are the films which I actually learned the craft of filmmaking from, because in those days, let's say in the 30s, 40s and 50s, American films are the only films that we got to see in Calcutta. And since by that time I had already developed a very serious interest in the cinema, I watched them very carefully and made mental notes of about cutting, about placement of camera, about various other things that go into making a film. Neorealism, of course, I was exposed to much later. It was in 1950 when I went to London. The first film I saw was Bicycle Thieves. By that time, of course, I had already the idea of making Patipachali at the back of my mind. And I was discouraged in Calcutta by professional filmmakers saying that you can't work with amateur actors, you can't work entirely in outdoors, you have to use the conditions of the studio, etc. Now, this is a film, Bicycle Thieves, which gave a lie to such statements. And I could see that De Sica had done exactly what I had in my own mind to do. Use new people, shoot on location, and even work with fairly indifferent technical equipment, because those were wartime, after the war, and they were using different kinds of stock during the film. It didn't matter, because the film had such a tremendous flow that any variations in density from shot to shot really didn't matter. So that was very, very inspiring. And when I say neorealists, I shall mention only De Sica, really, because he was, in a way, my mentor as far as the using of non-professionals and various other things, the density of a film, the amount of details that can be crammed into a shot or into a scene. All that was already there in De Sica. But when it actually came to making my first film, it was the subject matter which dictated the style of the film, the use of the camera, use of the editing. In other words, I had learned what I had learned from De Sica, but I was trying to be as faithful to the writer of the novel, Vibhuti Bhushan, as possible. So it was that which was guiding me. The guiding principle was faithfulness to the spirit of the original book. Eisenstein, I had read his theoretical books, Film Sense and Film Form, and of course they were fascinating, they were very difficult books, very abstruse occasionally, but I found it fascinating. But I cannot say that his style of filmmaking influenced me in any way. I think my style has very little relationship to the style of Eisenstein, whereas Renoir, whom I personally met in 1948 when he first came to Reconnaître for locations, and the long talks that I had with Renoir, they were most instructive. Again, the question of details, again, question of using the quintessential elements in the Bengali surroundings, in the landscape, which he was himself doing for the river, and which he would insist again and again, that you don't have to use too many elements in a film. You have to pick some very expressive, typical elements, and that does the work. So Renoir, and also his attitude to human beings, the way he handled his actors, the way he handled the relationships, the complexity of the characters, all that left a very deep impression on me. And I think subconsciously I have been paying tribute to Renoir throughout my filmmaking career, and also to a certain extent to De Sica. Well, I think I ought first to mention the Japanese, because I think Kurosawa is one of the giants of the cinema, and I greatly admire him. One or two other Japanese ought to be mentioned, but they are not contemporaries really, but Mizoguchi, people I have learned from. Mizoguchi is definitely there, to a certain extent Ozu also. Among the others, there is, of course, Bergman, whom I greatly admire, particularly for his intensity, and he has a marvelous stock company. His actors are superb, and he gets the most extraordinarily detailed acting from his actors. And among the Italians, well, there was a time when I used to admire Fellini very much, but his recent films are not really up my street. I mean, I can admire him as a technician. He's a wizard. But he's not perhaps a director of my heart. Among the Polish, Wajda, Kawalerowicz, I do admire very much. And hello.